could call in if you feel like calling in, chit chat right quick. I don't know who this is right here. It might be L.A. It might be L.A. Marzulli. I'm hoping it is. Hello?
Hey, Philip, it's L.A. Marzulli. How you doing, man?
Hi. How you doing, brother? Thank you for calling in. I don't know if we had a misunderstanding with the other brothers supposed to be calling in, but I just asked you to call in a little bit earlier just to shoot the breeze. I want to talk about your book, your new book. I didn't get the chance to read a bio on you or nothing like that, which I really wanted to do because I've been looking at your work for a while, and I'm just really impressed by it. I heard you on Dr. Sam Ortiz, and you were talking about the one book, Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural.
Okay.
And I was just blown away by your scenario about Isaiah 17 and Syria, and that scenario after that, Ezekiel 38, 39. Could you talk about that a little bit, that part of that book?
Well, I certainly will. We know from prophecy that Ezekiel 37 more than likely has happened. Now, there are people who are going to disagree with that, different people with different theological bents. That's fine. I'm not going to argue with them because it's pointless. To me, it's self-evident. In other words, when we see the prophecy that says, in the latter days I will regather you from the four corners of the earth, speaking of Israel, and reestablish you in your ancient homeland. Okay? That happened in 1948. But preceding that, at the end of the 19th century, several things happened which were unprecedented. They were, the latter rains began to fall in Israel, and there's a book. I'm just trying to see if I can find it here. If I can't find it real quick, I'm just going to... It's by a rabbi, and he talks about prophecy being fulfilled in the Muslim age of terror, which to the Israelis, that's where they're at. And it's really interesting because it's written from a perspective of a rabbi. This guy's not a Messianic Jew. He's a rabbi, okay? So he's still waiting for Messiah. And he talks about that in the end of the 19th century, the latter rain began to fall for the first time in 2,000 years. The earthquake stopped and the plagues of locusts stopped going into the area. Three major things. And what we see is the Israelis began to trickle in at that point. The Holocaust at the end of World War II serves as sort of the demonic springboard which catapulted Jews from all over the world back into Israel. There was no place to go. They had no place to go. Europe was ravaged. 6 million Jews perished in the ovens of the death camps, and I believe it was a deliberate Luciferian sacrifice. And I write about this in the coming book, The Cosmic Chess Match. In other words, if the fallen one could somehow wipe out every Jew, which certainly that was the final solution of Germany. So I'm not pulling rabbits out of my hat. That's what, had Hitler won World War II, that would have been it. There'd be, I guarantee you, I would doubt that there'd be any Jew left on the earth. The whole idea of that is, if he wipes out the Jew, he proves God a liar because the prophecy is negated. And then he wins the chess match, which is crazy. But that's what's at stake here. We can argue whether it's fair or not till the cows come home. I'm not going to do that. But what we do see is that from the birth pains of the Holocaust, the regathering of Ezekiel, which is prescribed in Ezekiel 37, happens, and the nation literally is born in a day in 1948. So to me, it becomes self-evident. Now, there are those people that still debate that, and look at it and go, oh, well, Israel could come in and out of the homeland. This could happen 50 more times. And I sit there and go, if that's your interpretation of prophecy, you're entitled to it. But to me, it becomes very much self-evident at this point that biblical prophecy has been fulfilled in our lifetime, 1948. So that's the first thing. Then we see, of course, the prophecy of Yeshua, Jesus, telling us that Jerusalem will be controlled by the Gentiles, i.e. non-Jewish people, until the times of the Gentiles are over. Again, this is, up to interpretation, and people have different spins on it. For instance, the Catholic Church will never recognize Israel. There's a group of Christians in this country and really in other places which adhere to replacement theology, which believes that the church now has replaced Israel. And I think it's very alarming for someone to adhere to that, because at that point, all prophecy as we know it is thrown out the window. Or there's the other interpretation of the preterists who believe all this happened in the first century, or the amillennialists who believe it's just an endless fight between good and evil and these prophecies can't be taken literal, and on it goes. The bottom line is, Yeshua holds, this is why I believe in prophecy literally, okay? Because when we go back and we look at Scripture, what it is, Yeshua, Jesus, holds the nation of Israel accountable to know the day of his visitation. How do we know that? And, people will argue this passage too, but they can do what they want. Jesus says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I would have gathered you, as a hen gathers your chicks, but you did not know the day of your visitation. What had just happened? What is he pointing to? He's pointing to when he rides into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey, precisely at the moment where the prophecy of Daniel says, from the time that the decree goes out to rebuild the second temple until Mashiach comes, it'll be 444 years, whatever the heck it is. I forget. Please forgive me. 449 years, okay? So it's like, he rides in. He arranges it. He rides in. Go get the colt. No one's ever ridden it. What is it for? It's for the master. Be like someone, borrowing your car that you don't know. Hey, where are you going with my Mustang? Well, the master has need of it. Oh, okay, go ahead. Bring it back by 5, will you? I mean, it's crazy when you think about that. Because, wildlife, or domesticated life, I should say, 2,000 years ago, that was a huge deal. And these guys go in, they get the donkey, and the Lord, they throw the clothes on it, and the rest we know. Palm Sunday, and even that's been obfuscated in the churches. You get a nice little palm, and you walk in, everybody sits down, I got my little palm. This is pretty cool. The whole thing's been obfuscated. What he's pointing to is that he rides in precisely 449 years later, after the prophet Daniel said he would come. So Mashiach is there. And then he says, right after that, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I would have gathered you as a hen gathers her chicks. And if you ever watched a hen gathers her chicks, it's just amazing. I mean, I live out in the country, and I've seen it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Especially the first time you see it and you equate it to the biblical passage. I mean, that hen is all over those kids, those little chicklings. Just gathering them up, folding their wings, moving them over here. And that's what Jesus is pointing to. And then he says, but you did not know the day of your visitation. So now your house is left to you desolate. And he weeps over Jerusalem. He weeps over Jerusalem. Why? Because the nation of Israel collectively did not know their prophecy. So, I mean, for those of us professing to be Christians, living in this day and age, who adhere to some of these other positions which I talked about, the amillennialist position, the historical interpretation of history, this endless fight between good and evil, or the preterist, which has already happened, or that somehow all this stuff is allegorical and we can't. I mean, remember this one woman on one dean of some religious studies back east someplace, and she's going, it's very, very dangerous to look at modern headlines and try to equate them into prophecy. Shouldn't do that. Well, that's crazy. That's crazy. We have Jesus' own admonition holding the nation of Israel collectively accountable to know the day of the visitation, to know it. How much more us when we've got everything at a touch of a button on the computer? Which translation do you want? Which study helps do you want? Do you want the Greek? Do you want the Latin? Do you want the Hebrew? Whatever you want, it's literally right there at a touch of a button. There's no excuse. And what we see is Israel has come back into its ancient boundaries, into its ancient homeland. So Jerusalem, Jesus says, will be trodden over by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is over. What do we see by that? Well, in AD 70, what happens? Titus comes in and wipes out Jerusalem. Interestingly enough, the Shekinah presence was in the Second Temple, I believe. There's a guest I had on my radio show, Bob Ryland, and he came on, and he's got this wonderful book called Jesus in the Third Temple, The Secret Rituals of the Red Heifer Sacrifice. And he believes that Golgotha was actually on the Mount of Olives, right next to where the red heifer ceremony was conducted year after year after year. It would have called the place of the skull. Absolutely. We're looking at thousands of red heifer skulls on that hill. And it overlooks the temple where the temple would have stood. And when the Roman soldier says, this is God, and he's, reporting what he's seeing, he's looking down the Mount of Olives through the eastern gate into where the temple was at the Holy of Holies, and sees the temple cloth curtain torn in two. So the Shekinah glory was in the temple. And then he says, oh my gosh, this must have been the Son of God. What motivates him to say that? So, Ryland's done this 700-page book, and it's just a phenomenal journey about why he believes where Jesus was crucified, the red heifer ceremony, why the Jews are going to do it back again. But I slightly digress. All that to say the Shekinah, and this is according to in the Mishrach and rabbinical traditions, the Shekinah left the temple about 3.5 years before the Romans came in. And it left and just sat on the Mount of Olives. This is recorded. Okay, I'm not making this stuff up. So the Shekinah glory left the temple and sat on the Mount of Olives for 3.5 years. Then, right before it left for the last time, it went back into the temple, okay, back into the temple. At 3 a.m., it left through the east gate. And the east gate, by the way, and the temple gate are huge gates which take sometimes 20 or 30 men to open up. And because of the hinges, they would groan. You could hear them literally several miles away. The east gate opens by itself, no groaning, and the rabbis see at 3 a.m. the Shekinah glory ascend from the Mount of Olives, more than likely the same place where Yeshua, Jesus, ascended. The Christians, looking at this, realize that when the Shekinah leaves, we should leave too. So the Christians get out of Jerusalem 6 months later, or thereabouts, or even less than that. The Romans come in, and they lay siege to the place, and after several years, they finally go in and destroy Jerusalem, destroy the temple, and so that ends the time of the Jewish dominating the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, okay, and Jerusalem and just as a city. So from AD 70 to the time of the Mohammedans, which is around AD 700, the Romans pretty much have control over it. From 700 to 1000 AD, the Muslims control it. The Crusaders come in and hold it for 200 years. Around the 12th century, Saladin comes in and retakes it from the Crusaders. Again, no Jewish. It's all Gentile, non-Jewish hands controlling the city of Jerusalem. Saladin takes it, and the Mohammedans basically hold it until the Mameluke Turks come in and take it. The Turks hold it until the end of World War I, where the Brits control it. After the Brits pull out, the Jordanians control it until 1967. It's almost 2,000 years, folks. 2,000 years it's been under control of non-Jewish hands until 67, where Israel finally regains the old city, fulfilling the words of Yeshua. Now, that should be screaming to people. See, it's self-evident. The Jews are now in control of the old city. Do they own the Temple Mount? No, but they control the old city. As Netanyahu said, Jerusalem is the eternal capital of Israel. He's not going to equivocate on that. He's not going to divide Jerusalem. There's no way he's going to do that. So the prophecy is being fulfilled. All that to say, and the reason why I went down that little bit of a diatribe there, is that the prophet Ezekiel 37 tells us that, okay, we regathered you from the four corners of the earth, but remember, in the Hebrew writing, there is no delineation between chapters. That's something that we did. So if you pick up a Tanakh, which is the entire Old Testament, which you would call the Old Testament, and look at the book of Ezekiel, there's no chapter delineation. There's just one. It goes right into one another. The verses go right into the next verse. So guess what happens after 37, Ezekiel 38? It's a confederacy of nations that align themselves with each other in this loose confederacy and go up against a land of unwalled villages. My critics have said, L.A., Israel isn't a land of unwalled villages. They've got that big wall to keep out the suicide bombers. That's a fence. That's not a wall, and it's not a wall what the prophet would be seeing in ancient times. It's not. Tel Aviv isn't surrounded by a wall. Beersheba, there's no other city surrounded by a wall in the modern era because airplanes can fly over it and drop bombs. But at the time where Ezekiel wrote the prophecy, there were walls around every city. That's how you lived, to keep pillaging armies from, taking your goods, raping your women, and selling your children into slavery. It's a whole different deal. So, I mean, it's like such nitpick, and they miss, they're straightening out the net, and meanwhile they got a beam in their eye. It's like there's a wall there, but Israel is a land of unwalled villages. Is it dwelling in safety?